I unboxed my Christmas gift. You won't believe what my grandma gave me. I almost didn't show up that Christmas. The house felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Too quiet. Too neat. Like someone had erased her from the walls but forgot to erase the air she used to fill. My grandma had been dead for 3 months. And yet, there was a wrapped gift under the tree with my name on it. I stood there staring at it while everyone else laughed, talked, pretended this was just another normal Christmas. My aunt clinked glasses in the kitchen. My cousins argued over a video game. My father avoided looking at me entirely. But my eyes stayed locked on that box. Because my grandma always wrapped gifts the same way. Plain brown paper, red string, a small handwritten tag in careful cursive. And this one said, in unmistakable ink, "For you, open last." My hands started shaking. I hadn't spoken to most of my family since the funeral. Not after what happened. Not after the way they'd looked at me when my grandma's will was read. Not after I learned how easily love could be rewritten as inconvenience. I was the grandchild who asked too many questions. The one who never fit. The one who was always told to be grateful for scraps. And my grandma, she was the only one who saw it. She never said much. She didn't need to. She'd squeeze my hand when things got tense. She'd change the subject when I was being cornered. She'd look at me across the room and somehow say, "I know," without opening her mouth. That's why losing her felt like losing oxygen. So seeing that gift felt impossible. I tried to ignore it. I really did. I sat through dinner. I forced smiles. I swallowed comments. I listened as my aunt talked loudly about how fairly everything was divided and how my grandma wouldn't want drama. But every few minutes, someone glanced at the box, like it made them nervous. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Well," he said, not meeting my eyes, "why don't you open your gift?" The room went quiet. Every instinct in my body screamed that whatever was inside that box was about to change everything. I knelt down and picked it up. It was heavier than it should have been. Inside the wrapping was a smaller wooden box, old, scratched. The kind of thing you don't buy, you keep. There was a brass latch on the front, and taped to the lid was an envelope. My name again. My grandma's handwriting again. I opened the envelope first. Inside was a single sheet of paper. And the first line made my chest tighten. "If you're reading this, it means I was right not to trust them." The room disappeared. I could hear my grandma's voice as I read. Calm, steady, certain. She wrote about how families smile while lying. How people talk about love when they really mean control. How she'd seen the way I was treated. The dismissive comments. The "you should be grateful." The way my needs were always last. Then came the sentence that made my fingers go numb. "They think I left you nothing." I looked up. My aunt was pale. My cousin suddenly very interested in his phone. My father's jaw was clenched so tight I thought it might crack. I went back to the letter. My grandma wrote that she'd watched them pressure her, rush her, suggest changes, make helpful comments about what made sense and what didn't. She wrote that she'd smiled and nodded and pretended to agree. Then she wrote, "I raised children, but I learned the hard way that not all of them grew into good people." My throat burned. She told me she'd prepared something separate, something no one else knew about, something meant for me alone, not as revenge, but as protection. Because I knew you'd need it. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the paper. I opened the wooden box. Inside was a key. Old, heavy, attached to a tag with a handwritten address. And beneath it, documents, bank statements, legal papers, a trust agreement. I didn't understand everything at first. I just knew it was serious, real, carefully planned. My aunt stood up. "What is that?" she asked too quickly. I didn't answer. I kept reading. The trust had been created years ago, funded quietly, built from money my grandma earned long before anyone else got involved. Money she never talked about. Money she never let them touch. The beneficiary name was clear: mine. My father finally spoke. "This isn't funny," he said. "You don't need to cause a scene." I looked at him. "I didn't," I said quietly. "She did." Silence fell like a dropped plate. The papers explained everything. The house, the accounts, the investments everyone thought were divided evenly. They weren't. What they'd received was what my grandma wanted them to think was everything. What I'd been given was the rest. The key was for a safety deposit box. The address was for a law office. And the final line of the letter made my breath hitch. "They will tell you I was confused. Don't believe them." That's when my aunt started crying. Not soft tears. Loud ones. The kind meant to control a room. "She didn't mean this," she said. "She was sick." You know how she got near the end. I folded the letter carefully. "She wrote this before she was sick." My cousin stood up. "You're tearing the family apart." I laughed once, sharp and bitter. "No," I said. "I just opened a box." The drive home that night felt unreal. My phone buzzed non-stop. Missed calls. Texts that swung wildly between guilt and anger. "We need to talk. This isn't what she would have wanted. You're being selfish. You owe us." I didn't respond. The next morning, I went to the address on the tag. The lawyer already knew my name. "She was very specific," he said. "She wanted this handled quietly. And she wanted you prepared." Prepared for what became clear very quickly. Because my family didn't stop. They questioned the will. They implied manipulation. They hinted at legal action. They tried to make me feel small again, like I'd stolen something instead of been given it. But they underestimated one thing. My grandma had prepared me too. Inside the safety deposit box was more than money. There were journals. Years of notes, dates, conversations. Things she'd overheard. Things she'd been asked to sign. Things she'd refused. There were copies of emails, messages, financial records that told a very different story about who'd been using who. The lawyer's expression changed as he read. "This," he said slowly, "is very thorough." I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't too sensitive. I was right. The confrontation came weeks later. We sat around the same table. No Christmas decorations this time. No forced smiles. They tried one last time. They said family mattered more than money. I told them family doesn't take and call it love. They said my grandma would be ashamed. I told them she planned this. And when I slid the copies of her journals across the table, something shifted. The confidence drained out of the room. They didn't yell anymore. They just stared. I left without another word. I used part of the money to move, quietly, far. I paid off debts I'd carried for years. I went back to school. I built a life that didn't require asking permission. And I kept one thing exactly as she left it. That wooden box. Every Christmas, I open it. I read her letter. I remind myself that love doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like preparation. My family barely speaks to me now. They tell people I changed. They're right. I finally stopped accepting less. So if you're watching this and you've ever been made to feel invisible, overlooked, or undeserving, remember this. Sometimes the people who love you most are quiet. Sometimes protection comes disguised as patience. And sometimes, the greatest gift isn't what's under the tree. It's the truth that frees you. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real, powerful stories like this, and comment where you're watching from.